American President Donald Trump is speaking today at the United Nations General Assembly. And, he has already criticized the United Nations and criticized Europe. But at the same time, he started praising his achievements in stopping many wars around the world. And that's why I suggest that in this episode, we briefly, right now, in emergency mode, go through the main statements of Donald Trump at the United Nations General Assembly in chronological order without unnecessary emotions. But nevertheless, let's briefly go over what the American president said in front of the world leaders. I'm Alexei Pecci, it's September 23rd, let's go through everything step by step. Well, I'll start by saying that Trump basically began his speech by praising America's domestic achievements. So, he talked about how during his first term he achieved success in the economy and in fighting illegal border crossings. Quote, "Today, just 8 months after I took office, we are the hottest country in the world, and no other country even comes close to us. America is fortunate to have the strongest economy, most secure border, most powerful military, closest friendships, and strongest spirit of any country on earth. This is truly the golden age of America." Well, that's where the praise ends. He praised himself and then went on to complain. The fact is, the President of the United States had to use a broken teleprompter in order to emphasize his deep grievances with the United Nations. Here's a quote. Well, here are two things I got from the United Nations: a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. In other words, he complained that when he was going up to the meeting hall, the escalator there also broke down. So, as he says, what is the purpose of the United Nations? For the most part, at least right now, it seems like all they do is write very harsh letters and then never follow through on them. These are empty words, and empty words don't solve the problem of war. And they add that the United Nations is generally ineffective as of today. Then President Trump touched on the topic of his desire to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, stating that everyone, absolutely everyone in the world, believes that he deserves it for his efforts to maintain peace around the world. Quote, "Everyone says that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize for each of these achievements. Well, I declare that means he ended several wars. But for me, the real reward will be the sons and daughters who grow up together with their mothers and fathers. Because millions of people will no longer die in endless and inglorious wars. I'm not concerned about awards, but about saving lives." Next, I want to emphasize that this year, Trump clearly won't receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Because now, even if he's nominated, it will only be for the sake of publicity. That's how the procedure works. Next. Donald Trump called the growing momentum for resolving the conflict based on the creation of two states at the United Nations General Assembly a reward for Hamas, reaffirming calls for a ceasefire and an end to the conflict in the Gaza Strip. This is about the recognition of the state of Palestine. By the way, today Canada, Australia, France, and the United Kingdom recognize the statehood of Palestine. And here's what comes next. On this occasion, Havrit. As if encouraging the continuation of the conflict, some members of this organization are seeking to unilaterally recognize the Palestinian state. The Hamas terrorists would pay too high a price for their atrocities. And Trump's statements were a direct response to the statements of a number of European countries about recognizing the Palestinian state. This largely symbolic step has deepened Israel's international isolation and did not receive support from the United States. According to Trump, recognizing the Palestinian state would reward these terrible atrocities, including October 7. Even though they refused to release the hostages or agree to a ceasefire, Trump has proposed an alternative diplomatic approach. Instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should unite with one message: release the hostages right now, just release the hostages. And then he adds, we must immediately stop the war in Gaza. We must end it. We must immediately start negotiations. We must agree on peace. We must bring the hostages back. Then Trump moves on to the issue of Russia's war against Ukraine, but in the context of criticizing the Europeans. Trump criticized European countries for continuing to buy Russian oil and gas, stating that he would not impose new sanctions against Moscow for the war in Ukraine until Europe stops buying gas. Quote, "They are embarrassed by this, and they were very embarrassed when I found out about it. They must immediately stop all purchases of energy resources from Russia, otherwise we will all waste a lot of time. European countries have greatly cut oil purchases from Russia since its invasion of Ukraine, but still buy natural gas. And the main part of European purchases of Russian oil comes from two countries, Hungary and Slovakia. Then Trump named China and India as the main sponsors of the ongoing war, continuing to buy Russian oil. But nevertheless, he specifically accused the European countries of being the ones contributing. Trump stated that the United States is fully prepared to impose a very high level of powerful tariffs against Russia. But Russia will reconsider Trump regarding taking similar measures. Trump sarcastically admitted that European leaders would be delighted to hear his public criticism, but that's how it is. Trump and many others believe that he is the one fulfilling the functions of the United Nations. Trump stated that he was the one who stopped 7 wars. Trump lists the conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Cambodia and Thailand, Israel and Iran, India and Pakistan, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Egypt and Ethiopia, as well as between Serbia and Kosovo. But there are some inconsistencies here because, President Trump's team scans the world looking for hot spots they can put out to score quick wins in their campaign for the Nobel Peace Prize. Some time ago, Trump mentioned in his speech his desire to receive that very Nobel Prize, saying that everyone thinks he deserves it. But there are questions about whether he really put an end to these conflicts, and whether this is truly his exclusive achievement. And then Trump announces international efforts to ensure compliance with the Biological Weapons Convention using an artificial intelligence-based verification system. In addition, Trump warns countries that they will end up in hell because of their migration policies. Let me pause here for a moment. So in his speech, Trump, by the way, he gets distracted a lot. I listened to his speech, and he got distracted a lot from the teleprompter. The teleprompter wasn't working, and he kept going off on tangents. And then, moving on, he criticizes the immigration policies of other countries and accuses the United Nations of funding migrant attacks on Western countries. Quote, "It's time to put an end to the failed open borders experiment. We need to put an end to this right now. I'm a real expert in this matter. Your countries are going down the drain." Next, Trump praises his own efforts to curb migration, which he says foreign leaders would be wise to adopt. Otherwise, quote, "your countries will be destroyed." Next, Trump once again accuses the United Nations of funding uncontrolled migration and creating problems for Western countries. He claims that it was specifically United Nations programs that allowed many migrants to start coming to Western countries. Next, Trump emphasizes the mission to fight the cartels, warning that he will destroy them completely. Quote, "Recently, we began using the supreme power of the United States Armed Forces to destroy Venezuelan terrorists and drug trafficking networks led by Nicolas Maduro." He means Venezuela's president. The United States Armed Forces have deployed more than 4,000 Marines and sailors to the waters of Latin America and the Caribbean. As part of increased efforts to combat drug cartels, Trump issued a warning to those he called every terrorist thug involved in smuggling poisonous drugs into the United States of America. And he says, "Please know that we will destroy all of you." Next, Trump claims that renewable energy is more expensive than fossil fuels. He is generally opposed to any green energy. And let me remind you, when he visited Britain, he said, "Listen, take down those wind turbines you installed in the ocean. They ruin the view and they're not economically viable." Next, Trump goes off script and makes some digressions. And he touched on issues related to his efforts to reduce crime in United States cities. As he called it, Barack Obama's hydrocarbon footprint, his own unsuccessful attempts to renovate the United Nations headquarters, and the effectiveness of those very wind power plants. And here is just a direct quote. "We don't need cows anymore. I think they want to kill all the cows," said Trump at one point, without explaining at all what this phrase was about. It was just a slip of the tongue. Basically, cows aren't needed. If there's any underlying theme, it's probably criticism of how most countries in the world solve problems, and a statement that his approach supposedly is better. Maybe it was an allusion or figure of speech, but it still sounded strange. Then he stated that in Asia, most of the garbage is dumped directly into the ocean. That was just a phrase he said at some point, and then he just continued his speech. That's it. So those are basically the main points of what Trump said at the United Nations General Assembly. Although I should remind you that the day before, his press secretary Caroline Leavitt said that this would be the biggest foreign policy speech you have ever heard. Right? But nevertheless, Trump then touched on the topic of tariffs, for example, trade tariffs, and he stated that the United States uses its tariff policy as a mechanism to protect the country's sovereignty and security. Quote, "In the United States, we want trade and active commercial relations with all countries, with all of them. We want to help, we will help these countries. But it also has to be fair and reciprocal." Then he stated that countries that violated the rules had a negative impact on states that follow the rules of trade. Quote, "That's why the United States is imposing tariffs on other countries. And just as these tariffs have been applied to us for many years, we used tariffs as a protective mechanism during the Donald Trump administration. Tariffs will ensure the system works for everyone and its sustainability in the future." Next, Trump pointed out that Christianity is the most persecuted religion on the planet. That's today. And I quote, "Let's protect freedom of speech, expression, and religious freedom, including Christianity, the most persecuted religion today. And let's cherish our sovereignty and preserve the qualities that have made each of our nations so special, incredible, and outstanding." In short, these are the main messages that the American president delivered at the United Nations General Assembly. Let me remind you, he has a meeting scheduled with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. After it ends, we'll meet again later tonight to discuss what the Ukrainian and American presidents agreed on. And there are still several more episodes ahead on current topics. So, if you haven't subscribed to this YouTube channel yet, be sure to do it. Hit the like button, click the bell, and don't forget to write your comment. On this episode, write your opinion about Donald Trump's speech. I especially liked his digression, for example, about cows, about how we don't need cows anymore. Well, write in the comments what you like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. To be continued.